Okay, got it. All right, members. Oops. Welcome to this meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Board, Wednesday, 1st of December. Items on the agenda, substitutes nominated for this meeting. Are there any?
None received, sorry, Chair.
That's all right. So I thought either you've gone deaf or mine with computer. So no from Lauren in the, could you just mute yourself when you're not speaking? Okay. Members' interest, I need to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or other interests they may have in these items on this agenda. At now or the appropriate time, Danielle will put your usual ones down if that's all right.
Sorry, Chair. My usual ones are now different. I hope that's okay to update. I'll put it in the chat to help. Or do you want me to disclose them as well?
Let's disclose them now.
So I'm no longer on the North Halifax Partnership Board. So that one's not been put on. I'm no longer a governor at Park Lane, but the other governor at Ash Green still stands.
Okay, got you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Admission of the public. If we were able to have the public here, they would be, but they're not. We are live on YouTube. It can be viewed. You can view the whole thing again tomorrow, which is beneficial for me because I can't see anybody on my screen at the moment apart from Danielle. Minutes of the meeting held on the 27th. Of October. Comments, members? No comments?
No.
Correct record. Sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm happy to propose them as a correct record.
Could I have a second, please? Speech.
Yes.
Councillor Holdsworth, Chair.
Councillor Holdsworth, thank you.
I'm just going to put some more lights on.
Item 5, members. Appointment of co-chair member. Hello. Calderdale Costa Fairers, Calderdale Foster Carers Association. We have a nomination for Frank McLaughlin, who I thought was is not here. Comments, members, if there are any. No? I know Frank, I've met him previously. I have no problems with his nomination. I need a proposed seconder to full council.
I'll propose him.
Thank you, Sue. A seconder?
I'm happy to second him, or Diana was there as well.
Diana, a quick comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment because I was contacting Lauren about this earlier. I thought it was really good to have this representation on the panel. I think it makes sense. But I was sort of asking Lauren about the possibility of having people with experience of care as well, or someone with experience of care, either an older care leaver or someone who is, perhaps an older person. Or a teenager or someone, whether that's an appropriate thing perhaps to consider for the future. And I just sort of thought I'd throw that in there, really.
Julie.
Thanks very much, Councillor Raystrick. Yes, just to advise Children's Scrutiny, we usually do have a representative from the Youth Parliament. You remember Pranitha, who was attended regularly and updated us on the education. That's really from the kind of, I'd suppose I'd call the Youth Council a bit more mainstream. And we do have representatives from the Children and Care Council who attend corporate parenting panel. So it's up to yourselves to consider, Councillor Raystrick, who you want to hear the voice from. You may want young people in care to attend when there's relevant reports on the agenda relating to their care and the services they get from the council and partners, and to hear their voice. It's for you to consider really who you'd like to have in addition to the Youth Parliament. But just to say, they do attend, as you're aware, Councillor Ray Strick, the corporate parenting panel.
Yeah, I'm going to take that suggestion outside this meeting. The pros and cons are this is one of the largest boards on the council. In a previous existence, I campaigned for it to be made smaller. I do appreciate the importance of reaching out to the voice of young people, I think, and we do that quite well at the moment. But certainly I can take it as a suggestion outside this meeting. So I've got a proposal for Councillor for Frank McLaughlin. Do I have a seconder?
Councillor Courtney's indicating, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Courtney, thank you, Sarah. That recommendation, I think we have to have a vote, do we? So could you raise your hands? All those in favour? Is somebody counting this? Okay, we got that.
Yeah.
Any against? I take it that's a none, although I obviously can't see it. Item 6, members. Update to delays in court cases as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Who's running this? Welcome, Leslie. Finally, we meet in person.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. We've brought a number of people for you to be able to talk to about court cases. So can I just introduce the team that we brought there, Chair, then we can explain a little bit, or we can go straight to questions if that's okay. So can I introduce David first? David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good evening. My name's David Chambers. I'm service manager for the localities and with the social workers that work within the court case.
Okay, thanks, David. Elaine?
Good evening. My name's Elaine Cartwright. I'm one of the team managers. I cover the central and west area of Halifax and also the Upper Valley, which is Todmorden and Hebden Bridge. So my team is child protection and child in need social workers. So we take a lot of the cases through the courts.
Thanks, Elaine. And then the elusive Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rob and councillors. Yeah, my name's Leslie Warnes. I'm the Care Proceedings Case Manager in Calderdale and co-author of the report that you've been looking at today.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. Just to give you a little bit of background to this report. This report first came in August of this year. I think the members were very interested in the discussion. And again, what we said we'd do is we'd bring an update on a regular basis. So this is the first update. And rather than going through the report, I thought it would be better for the team to come and respond to any questions that members have. And obviously, if people want to fill in any of the gaps in between, we can do that as well.
All right. Well, I'll start because members are. I'll repeat what I always say at the beginning of these meetings. If you want to make a comment, just let me know via chat. I can't really see many people at the moment. Oh, it's getting better. So the usual routine. Again, I thought this was a fascinating report. I'll start while members get warmed up. And I do have a couple of questions. See if I've got the first one first. On the final page, conclusion 6.1. We're talking about time limits for care proceedings. How many of these proceedings that overflow? I want to be careful how I phrase this. Take an 8-week extension down to procedural problems, and how many of them, if any, are down to things that we could rectify to make it quicker? And do we look at those instances?
Would you like me to start that one off, Rob?
Yeah, please, Leslie.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that question. Yes, we do look at those cases very carefully because as part of my role representing Calderdale on the local Family Justice Board, I prepare a quarterly report, and as part of that report I will have an overview of those cases that have been delayed over 26 weeks. I will also get to see the court orders that will have some comment on why that case has been delayed. And I will also liaise with colleagues in teams as to why they think the case has been delayed. So there's a broad sort of conversation about the delay. So often they're not procedural in terms of, you know, we haven't got a judge or something, but there can be themes that arise. And some of those themes are widely acknowledged from the outset that there may be delay. So if I could give an example of that, that might be a case where we would call it an international element. So we know from the outset that we've got a family overseas that may be able to look after a child that we say currently might be at risk. So we have to liaise with the appropriate embassies, consulates, whatever, the professionals on the ground to maybe assess family members, etc., etc. So we know that some delay is going to come with that. There are other cases that we can't foresee some of the delay because we have a human element here. We have family members and wider friends that may not get involved with us through choice until later on in the proceedings. And then if they present themselves and say, now we're interested to become involved, obviously that takes time to resolve as well. I rarely see, in my experience, areas of concern with our practice. There may be times when we think, oh, maybe we could have done that a little bit better, and we'll look at that. But there are usually very clear reasons for delay, and the delay is always around the welfare needs of the children, balanced against true justice being done and the human rights of all those concerned. So we do carefully look at it, we do have those conversations, and I'm able to analyse in my reports some of that delay. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, partly.
Right.
If I may just follow up before I go to Sue. So we're judging our own performance rather than, there's no internal assessment of that, no external assessment of that. Do we ask, like we have peer reviews of other departments, do we ask other people to come and say, how well are we doing this? Or are we doing so well that we don't need to do that?
Well, in my limited role, the reports that I prepare will go to the chair of the Justice Board. It gets read out at the Justice Board across West Yorkshire. So the Justice Board includes all the stakeholders, which will be judges, barristers, lawyers, representatives from other agencies, and everybody gets access to that information and can challenge. And those challenges then, you know, we respond to those. So I suppose there is, yes, some general oversight from the Family Justice Board members, and that data then gets, you know, sent to a more central government position. So the Her Majesty's Court Tribunal Service Secretariat, and nationally there's a performance group that looks at how well we are performing nationally. There's just data that's provided that only certain people can access, that we can see our own performance and pitch it against others nationally as well. In England and Wales, but in terms of somebody coming in from another local authority and saying to us, you know, what's going on in your authority, let's have a look at reasons for delay, that doesn't happen at that level.
Chair, could I just come in as well? There are a number of points where challenge is made, and actually, if I'm honest, being on the end of that challenge, that sometimes can be quite robust. So I meet with a district judge, as do all the other assistant directors across the region. Leslie has a meeting that she goes to. There's a meeting that we do with CAFCAS as well, where David attends. There are a range of challenge meetings there. I think what Leslie said as well is that there's a range of data that comes out, both regional and national, where we can monitor ourselves against, and we are picked up in terms of how performance is out of kilter. What we've been looking really closely through the course of the pandemic is probably more close than usual, is really making sure that the pandemic isn't having an impact. And I think what we've seen and what the judges have confirmed is that we should be quite reassured in terms of through the pandemic that we've kept our foot on the gas really. Where there's been delays, often that is to do because we need expert witnesses or additional assessments being requested that take us beyond the timescale. And just for clarity as well, because it may not be really clear in terms of the decision to extend by 8 weeks has got to be done by the judge, and the judge will only extend it if they feel like there are circumstances that warrant that. If there aren't circumstances, then we have to comply with the current times as well. So I think that becomes that's where the challenge comes in, and it's because it's in a court arena, that challenge is fairly robust as well.
So would you like to ask a question, please? Councillor Holdsworth.
Yes, I was just wondering, I have read that there are 50,000 cases of general criminal problems due to go before the courts. And I just wondered what the numbers were of cases that are being delayed in Calderdale for young people, the case that you're discussing at the moment.
Can I just just clarify a point there? So these are not criminal cases, these are family cases where we're talking about children who we're looking at care planning for children. So they come under a different court arena, but certainly in terms of,
right, yes,
we can give you some figures in terms of numbers of children that we have going through care proceedings. I don't know if Leslie, you're able to do that.
I think at the last count we had about 38, and we just had a new baby born this morning, so which will go into court, I believe, tomorrow or Friday on an urgent basis. So we're round about the 38 children in proceedings currently.
Thank you.
I haven't got the detail with me now about, you mentioned the delay and how many are delayed currently. I can get that for you to submit at a later date if you like, but I haven't got that on that right with me now, sorry.
Yes, please. And thanks, Robert. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. I knew they weren't criminal cases, but I was just wondering what sort of broad comparisons were. But thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sarah, Councillor Courtney.
Sorry, thank you for this report. You mentioned in one of the points under the sort of main issues for scrutiny about making sure that that where there were delays, that the children, that it was having as minimal impact on the children. So can you just sort of like assure us that obviously, well, I'm assuming that sort of children are front and center of everything that you do, and just sort of reassure us and assure us how the impact on the children and young people is kept to an absolute minimum in where there are delays, please.
Okay. Do you want to do that, Leslie or Elaine?
Wondered about Elaine or David maybe wanting to come in with that.
Hi there. So what we're doing in terms of those cases, they were actually already with family members. So we always look at the safety, obviously the welfare and the safety of the child is paramount in everything we do. So in terms of the impact, they were already placed with the family members, and that was going to be the longer term plan, or at least the anticipated plan. So in that sense, they were already in a safe placement and already had significant relationships with those people. So that's what we meant by that point. Does that answer that, Councillor?
Yeah, I suppose I just meant, in that particular case that was sort of clear in what you'd said, but I just want sort of some assurance really that, you know, how you might do it in other cases, or, you know, that just some reassurance really that in all cases children are, you know, sort of the impact of any delays, the impact on the children are minimised in cases where there are delays or where things are taking, you know, like a long time. Just how, you know.
So, so we hold what we call permanency planning meetings, where we're always looking at the permanence of the child. So obviously the safety comes first, and then the care planning, obviously. So if they need to go into a foster care placement or a residential placement, or whether we do have any family and friends there. So we're always tracking permanence, and we're always looking at those assessments. We make sure that we try and stick to all the timetables as much as possible. As Leslie and Rob have said, sometimes they can be delayed because expert witnesses may want longer time to do their reports, or it may be that a family member or parent may need some support or therapy or some parenting support. So that can delay it. But we always make sure that we're thinking of the child first, and any kind of delay, we will instruct our solicitors to go back in, and we will challenge any delay through the court proceedings.
Great, thank you.
May I add? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, if you have something to add, Leslie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. May I add as well, it's always a balancing act. We always have to look at all areas. Obviously, as Elaine says, the welfare of the child is our paramount concern. And we have to balance that against what's best for them right now. And if that delay is, yes, they're going to be impacted in some way, but it's going to be the best possible outcome. We're going to do everything in our power to ensure that. So, for example, we do arrange contact with family members, and that happens frequently and is monitored and supervised, and we're able to reassure the child that the parents are okay, and the parents can be reassured that likewise, and that relationship can be maintained throughout those proceedings. There are ways to step up other people that might become involved with the family or wider connected care, as we would call them, friends and family. But all the while, the safety element comes above everything else. But we are constantly reviewing and looking at the best possible experience for the children, really.
And is there sort of, talking to them about, because obviously with very little ones, they might not know what's going on, but with older children, they might be aware of the delays. And if they're involved in the proceedings and they're interested, the sort of reassurance to them as well that, things are still happening and stuff, and them being involved in the at an appropriate level, being involved in discussions around what's happening.
Yeah, very much so. We make sure that the voice of the child is always strong and that we're listening to children. And equally, children do get an opportunity to speak to the judge or write a letter to the judge as well and express their wishes and feelings at times, because sometimes maybe our care plan or what we think is right, the child may not agree with. And so we do make sure that those channels and that channels are open, and the child really does have a chance to talk about their lived experience and actually what they want for the future. As you said, it's really difficult for younger children. But what we start doing from any early age is we start what we call life story work. So we try and map out what's happened to them so that when they get to a point that they can maybe understand some of the decisions, or why they've stayed with mum, or why they've gone to grandma, or why they've gone into care, then we start that very early on so that there is a narrative for them when they're old enough to understand actually what's happened.
And may I also add, as it's detailed in the report, thanks Elaine, sorry to keep jumping in, Chair, the child is represented in court as well through their own solicitor, and their voice is spoken through their what's called a children's guardian, and I've mentioned it in the report. So even if, we're doing everything that we can, there's always somebody else there that will be able to add to that and enhance that position from the child's perspective.
Councillor Foster, Dot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for being a little late, Chair. I couldn't find the meeting link until my colleagues said to me. This is a really interesting report, but it's also a very worrying one. And my apologies if this has been mentioned. I think you were discussing this already when I managed to join the meeting. The 1.2 gives all the national average care proceedings cases in weeks. How does Calderdale compare to those? And also, they start in May last year, which is into the pandemic period. Can you give an indication of sort of the target is 26 weeks, if I've understood that correctly? Can you give any sort of indication of how many cases were missing that target? Obviously, I appreciate that some have extensions for particular reasons, but how many were missing that target because of lack of capacity in the courts, for example, and how we compare to the national average, and what, if anything, we can do to help improve the experience for families who are having to wait such a long time for a decision on their cases. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I can answer some of that. I'm one of a few people that are on a named list of people that can access national data that's official, sensitive at the moment, so unpublished. So I can't give you the absolute up-to-date, most recent data for the national. What I can say is the trend is, I think, going in a similar way. Locally, the West Yorkshire figures are similar to the national average. Calderdale, fortunately, are below the national average. and below the regional average, I would say, in our performance data. I can get you better information after this meeting. But yes, you're right, the figures are high, but it is a national trend. You mentioned as part of your question, due to the capacity of the courts, that is a factor, but it's not just the courts, it's all the stakeholders as well. So as Rob mentioned, there are experts that may have been planning to see a parent, let's say the parent's now got COVID, isolating, the expert can't carry on with that report. So, you know, there are other things that might bring delay with it. But yes, the court capacity has impacted that, but they are doing a pretty good job of getting through them now, believe it or not, because of the way that they're now approaching the court hearings, in that, you know, parents can now come along to court and be there in person, whereas the rest of us have to attend remotely like this. That in itself brings delay. There has to be regular breaks and all the rest of it. And if I were to tell you now that we're currently in a court case that's set down for 15 days length of hearing, you know, that gives you an idea of how complex and complicated these cases can be. So I can answer some of your questions. I can provide some more data at a more appropriate time, but as I say, some of it's quite sensitive still. Once it's published, anybody can see it, but I'm reluctant to sort of release any of that just now.
I understand. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any data that you have that you can publish on,
yeah,
to answer Councillor Foster's questions, if you could let Lauren or Sophie have that for distribution.
Absolutely.
But it's quite worrying what you just said about, because I made a note about paragraph 2.2.6, which the President of the Family Justice Division, Sandra McFarlane, I'm reading between the lines of that paragraph, and he seems to think that it's always going to be hybrid. And the argument for hybrid is that it's more efficient, that we don't have to travel to Leeds every day for 15 days, and people aren't going to miss it because of, you know, we're going to use less petrol. No, that's important. But and it's going to be hybrid all the time. Are we saying that justice, because that seems to be the wrong way around it, it's going hybrid is making it slower? Is that what we're saying?
No,
and is it all going to be
hybrid? No. I think there's a couple of things, Chair. I think there was a backlog because of COVID, and if you think right at the very beginning of COVID, everything stopped here, so there was a delay already that people were trying to build up. I think what we would say is that for us, I think hybrid works really well, and I think for the courts it works really well. I think I'll ask Elaine in a minute just to give you some examples of how it works better for us, but there are some cases and some parts of the court process where they need to be done face-to-face. You know, we're talking about really big decisions that affect people's lives, so they need to be done face-to-face, they need to be delivered face-to-face, and parents particularly need to understand the rationale for that. But from a different perspective, what you could probably argue is that the court process historically has been very inefficient, because actually it requires people usually to go to Leeds, all of our staff to go to Leeds. They can be there for a full day for a hearing that takes 15 minutes, then things are adjourned. But if I ask Elaine to give you some examples of why it's efficient for us, and I suppose we're quite looking forward to the hybrid model, because I think we've developed some new skills about how we do the court hearings, and our staff like it. And I think for families as well, it takes away some of the stigma and some of the pressure for them as well, the hybrid model. But if I bring Elaine now, Elaine could give you some, I suppose, more concrete examples of that.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I would echo what Rob's just said, really. So the time is significant for us. Having to get trains or drive to Leeds, as I'm sure all of you have tried to do that in the past, is so much time. You can be waiting around in the court for a long time, really just sitting there, not doing much. So at least with the hybrid model, we can at least be doing emails or at least writing reports and then be ready for the court hearing and be sat there waiting. So certainly time is a big factor, and obviously that means money as well. For us, our hourly rates, our pay, it means we can be more effective in our job, and equally our carbon footprint, so that's a lot better. Obviously, one size doesn't fit all. So as Rob said, we're making really serious big decisions. So families need to make sure they've got their legal representative and they can maybe go off into a room and have a private conversation, which is a little bit more difficult and feels a little bit more alien virtually. So I think certainly for families to be there, it's really important. And also a lot of our families don't have the technology or they don't have the private space either. So they'll be constantly interrupted. As we all can be virtually, but it's when it's those really serious times, it becomes really more problematic. So I think the hybrid model will work a lot better, certainly for my team.
All right. And you think hybrid is the future? That's going to be imposed on anybody. You seem to like it, but that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think so, Council, because when we had the court in Halifax, we could literally run round the corner or we could be there or, it wouldn't be an hour on the train and then making sure you got there however long before. So I think it is more effective. Again, I think there'll be hearings where perhaps we will have to attend. Maybe that might be part of it, but I think, we need to embrace some of the new technologies that we've kind of started using, and I think there is some merit in it. So yeah, I would say so.
I think one of the things that you can't underestimate, Chair, as well, is for families. If you think of the example we've just been given of 15 days in the court, for some families, that's a really arduous task, as it is for social workers. And I think what the President is thinking is that how do we make it less onerous and less stigmatising and less difficult for parents as well. And I do agree that there are some real benefits from a hybrid model. That means that actually families don't feel under so much pressure. And the other thing as well is we're asking parents often to get somebody to care for other children while they go to court as well. So there's a whole range of dynamics there that I think the President is starting to understand. I think one of the things that was really interesting is I think he said that he's not going to dictate how things should be, but what he is saying is that that depends on individual cases and on individual judges about how they want to manage them cases, which I think is probably a really sensible way of doing things, rather than saying everything will be hybrid, everything won't. This should be about individual cases and what's best for that child or what's best for that family.
All right. There's nothing further, members, and there doesn't seem to be. I'm going to say thank you very much for the report. I'd echo Sarah's comments. I thought it was very interesting. I actually wrote very interesting on it. Perhaps not as interesting as last time. This was very interesting last time, but I think I knew a bit more about it this time. Given that we're going to get the numbers from Leslie, I'm reasonably pretty happy with all this, I think, and everybody else should be. We're doing our best again, I think. And we'll have a look again in maybe a year's time, or maybe 9 months, or whenever we fancy. But and thank you for your good work. I think again it's another example of we're coping against the odds and sometimes coming out on top of them, which is what every bookie doesn't want. All right, members, thank you very much. Thank you to the guests.
Thank you.
Item 7, members. Pupil place planning.
I think we've got Leslie and Richard, Chair.
Leslie, good evening.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. Yes, we've brought a paper on place planning. I'm going to hand to Richard Morse to just talk through the paper. Councillors have had it in advance, so he'll just go through the headline information.
Thanks, Leslie.
Hi, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure councillors will be aware of the local authority's statutory duty to ensure sufficiency of provision, that we have enough pupil places, as well as duties around ensuring quality of education and sustainability of that provision. One of the tools we use to achieve that is the Planning of School Places document, which we produce annually. And what that does for us is identify demographic pressures in the more immediate term. Colleagues will also be aware of our local plan in Calderdale, and that's currently in the pipeline, and that sets out, amongst other things, a future housing trajectory for new homes across the borough. So in order to identify pressure points and issues, what we've done as a team is we've taken our Planning of School Places document and we've overlaid what we anticipate the impact of the local plan to be. From that, we've identified various issues and pressures that we've identified within this report, and also some of the actions and where they're immediately apparent are identified there. What we're also proposing to do, of course, because issues such as demographics and housing trajectory is likely to be subject to change in the future, is that we're proposing to keep a close watching brief on issues so that we can react to those demographic changes, and if the housing trajectory accelerates or decelerates, then we can make sure our actions are timely. Now we've summarised by different parts of the borough what the issues are in the paper. I don't propose to go through part by part what those issues are unless colleagues would like me to do so, but I'm more than happy to take questions on this.
Excellent, Richard. Again, members, always take a bit of time to warm up, but just on my on a quiet note, I had a sweepstake on the first time local plan would be mentioned on this, and I think I just won. Anyway, Councillor Rivion. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, having quite a few technical problems, but hopefully the clunky old laptop's working now. Yeah, one of the things I would like to ask is that the way it's organised by the areas or wards, I wonder how helpful this actually is. I mean, for example, we know there's a lot of pressure on places in North Halifax because there is one non-selective school there that's very popular, but a significant number of those pupils are coming from outside North Halifax. For example, in town, Croydon Academy is a feeder school for Trinity. All the time I have lived in town ward, I don't think children from this area have ever actually gone predominantly to a school in this area. They used to predominantly go to Hippodrome and Lightcliffe, what's now Lightcliffe Academy, and now predominantly go to Trinity. So I'm just wondering, you know, how we can plan that actually looks perhaps at distance travel, parental preference, and the journeys people are actually going, because I'm sure that is not the only instance where predominantly pupils are not actually going to the school in their area, and it may well not be either the one that traditionally I have history with, or the nearest, or the one, you know, planning school places on these areas might not actually make sense in terms of the schools people attend, parental preference, and the distance travelled.
Yeah, in terms of how we produce demographic data, we look at historical parental preferencing patterns and where the intakes have come from. But I would say predominantly the final tiebreaker in any admission arrangement is distance. And if we look at some of the pressures in North Halifax at the moment, as an example, we know that not all local children are currently getting in. Mm-hmm. No, it's not a huge number at the moment. I think there were about 15 local families couldn't get their preference met this year. But with those growing local numbers, we know going into the future that number is going to increase. But you're right, of course, if you took a grammar school as an example, then locality is not an important factor in their admission arrangements. But I would suggest for the non-selectives, predominantly, there's always that sort of underlying tiebreaker of distance, although some have catchment areas which might skew that slightly. That's still the sort of final tiebreaker, if you like.
Yeah, sorry, could I come back on that? Because I'm not necessarily speaking about distance. I mean, give the example of area I know very well with like both town North Halifax. The distance from, and I've not measured it, but I think you'll find the distance from, like, say, Boothtown to Trinity is less than maybe from a lot of parts of North Halifax, perhaps Mixon and place like Ogden, which would more naturally associate as North Halifax, but are actually further away. So I'm not really talking about distance. I think I'm talking about communities and how they identify. And also there are some school areas which would be nearer to 2 schools than another community would be 1. So I'm well aware that distance is the final arbiter, but what I'm actually saying, but the nearest school is by no means necessarily like for a North Halifax child within North Halifax or a town child within town, you know? So I feel this rather skews the picture.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of understand where you're coming from there. What I would say is to some extent when we've written this paper, we've tried to marry up the local plan and our planning of school places document so that we can look at the impact of the new housing and on the broad area. But in terms of when we come down to specific proposals, we do more detailed analysis to make sure, for example, we weren't expanding a school where there were lots of people travelling from out of area. One of the measures is, of course, we need sufficient local provision, and one of the measures of that is reasonable travelling distance, which in statute, I guess in today's terms is not particularly relevant. It looks at a suitable walking distance. So for the over 8s, I think it's 3 miles. For the under 8s, it's 2 miles. In today's day and age, a lot of people drive or can use public transport. So it's never quite as simple as just looking at the current school's catchment area and viewing it that way. We do need to look at where the demand is to places and also what the most suitable and appropriate school to expand would be.
And just to find, sorry, one last point. You've got like schools that are within the mat, which also I think aren't always the nearest. And again, the Acorn and Trinity is an example.
Yeah, if we're talking North Halifax, I think that there is a priority given to those in the mat, but that does come further down after the catchment area criteria. So predominantly it does serve North Halifax at the moment, but yeah, if there are places left over, then those attending a mat school can be given priority.
I know I'm labouring the point, but there is that very significant number that are actually in town, not North Halifax, that would not have been going there in the past. And they attend Croydon, which is within the mat. And as I said, it's distance, but those aren't reflected always in what's North Halifax or town or any of the other way you've labelled the communities.
Yeah, indeed. But what I would say is that they're getting in as at the tail end of the process as a low priority. But you are correct. There are about 15 or so families getting in if they're attending Trinity Mat based on last year's allocation of places.
I still don't think I've entirely got this across, you know, that those in town are near to Trinity, they're attending a mat and they will get preference, say, over children in Mixenden on nearness, but the town, not North Halifax. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
If I could just come in as well there, please, Chair, that I think, as Richard's pointed out, we look at a whole range of criteria, but it's not an exact science and things do change. So parental preference is the big factor that we can't predict. And as Councillor Riven just touched on there, that in previous years, children from North Halifax parents were choosing to go to Lightcliffe Academy, and then some of those patterns have changed over time. And that's something that we try to work through those historical patterns, but we have to bear in mind that will change again. And I think one of the priorities is as well as looking at sufficiency of places and making sure we've got places in the right areas of the borough, we're also working really hard on the quality of education at all our schools to make sure that we're supporting parents to have access to the very best best education in their local area. And that's an ongoing piece of work. And we're working in January on some specific work on inclusion, which is focusing on trying to make sure we can keep local children in local schools. So all those things are factors in school place planning.
Good luck with that, Leslie. Sheila.
Thank you, Chair. I know some of us have been on this board for some time, but I've sort of, on my reading of this document, it seems that where there's a shortfall of places, it's mainly secondary, and the surplus of places is mainly primary. And thinking back, we were aware of a bulge coming through from primary for quite some time. So I'm a bit, surprised that there is still a shortfall. And I just wondered if there was any particular circumstances that meant that sort of knowing that what the need would be, why that's been difficult to be met. And the second sort of part to my question is that in primary, where there are surplus places, we've been in this cycle before, and I appreciate with primary schools you only get a few years notice of any bulge coming through, but I just feel that previously we've been in a situation where schools have been closed because of surplus places, only for a few years later a new school being required. And the cost of shutting schools down and reopening new schools is far greater than keeping schools open a bit longer with surplus places. So I just wondered what plans you had for that.
Yeah, I think it's an ever-changing picture, and there are a lot of variables in that can affect what we do and what we anticipate. And I suppose if you look back, you've had a changing picture of Europe and succession states joining, and we saw migration in on the back of that, and on the back of Brexit, we've seen migration back out again. So you're always going to get factors like that that you can't necessarily predict. But you're right, that there has been a bulge that's fed through primary. We've needed to expand there. And now it's feeding through the secondary arena. We have already done quite a lot of work. We've expanded at Ryburn, we've expanded at Brooksbank, and Calder High, for example. But I guess it's an ongoing thing. We are also, because our schools are popular and successful, net importers of pupils from neighbouring boroughs. So we get about anywhere between 10 and 15% of our secondary population at any time that comes from Kirklees and Bradford, and to a lesser extent down the valley we have coming over for Todd High. So there's it is a constantly changing picture, and we are pretty good at projecting things. We do get a scorecard from the DFE which shows the accuracy of our projections, and we are very accurate at the moment. I hope we can maintain that, but with things like the local plan, which we're on our second version of the housing trajectory there, and that's quite significant. We've seen maybe 2,000 or 3,000 houses gone from the middle of the plan to the end of the plan. So that does alter quite significantly the need for those additional places, because what ideally you want to do is fill up first and then expand for the extra pupils that you anticipate to come through, not to expand and hope for the best, or expand too early, in which case if you've got a vulnerable school down the road, you're potentially putting those at risk. So we're walking a fine line, and it is very difficult, and there are a number of variables, which is why what we must do here is whilst we can bring forward proposals, always keep a watching brief and monitor for those changes in preference patterns, demographic trajectory coming later than we'd originally anticipated.
In terms of the falling roles in primary as well, Sheila, that's something we're working really closely with our schools on. and we've had a number of schools that have recently federated. So we had 2 in the Sowerby Bridge area, small primary schools that have federated, and that's really helped with their longer term sustainability and kept them there. So if places do grow, they've got the capacity there, but they're viable as they're running now because they're sharing some of the leadership costs and some of the resourcing costs. And also it has an impact on the quality of education because they've got greater opportunities for staff development, for shared curriculum planning and development. So that's a really successful process that's worked there. Likewise, in Hebden Bridge, we've done the same, where we've had 3 schools that are now federated there and bringing the benefits along with that. And we were in discussions with a number of other schools that are in a similar position at the moment to look at the best options for them and support them through that process. And that's very much about looking at the long-term sustainability to keep schools locally in the community, but make sure that they are sustainable and viable long-term.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Durrance, Danielle.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Riveron mentioned a lot of what I was going to raise. My only other question is, and more around COVID really, the school within North Halifax that says he's non-selective works on a fair banding process. COVID will have impacted a lot of our young people in order that, you know, we're playing quite a lot of catch up. And I wonder how many of the young people are filtered out because they are then able to only take a certain percentage of children from each fair banding. And I've tried my best to look at how a non-selective school is still classed as that if it uses a fair banding process, because in effect it's selecting a proportion of its pupils depending on the outcome of the test. So yeah, that's kind of my question. And how are we going to ensure that we're not opening up opportunities to bring other children from neighbouring boroughs and filtering more of ours out because they don't fall into the group that we've agreed they can fall into because we've got spaces?
Yeah, 2 points there. Firstly, in terms of fair banding, and I'm not here to advocate a fair banding or otherwise, but the way it works, it's not selective in the same way that a grammar school test is selective. In other words, you don't need to pass an academic threshold to be considered for a place. And my understanding, and Trinity are autonomous and do set their own admission arrangements and administer the fair banding assessment. And my understanding of it is that everybody that wants to sit the test sits the test. And it's only at that point, once they've sat the test, that they set the share per banding of pupils that they're going to take, and that's intended to be reflective of those that have sat the test. So if there's fewer in band A, then the number admitted in band A will be lower, and if there's more in band C, then that band will be higher. So it's not a straight quartile or measurement against national averages. It is meant to reflect the local community, but I think, you know, Trinity are probably the best ones to defend that position. I think the role of the local authority is to watch very carefully and make sure that there isn't any disadvantage there. And if we do view the arrangement as unfair, then the route for us to challenge that would be through the Office of the Schools Adjudicator. And indeed, we have been to the adjudicator previously, and you know, some cases we've won, others we've not won. They've not been upheld. So that would be our challenge there. So theoretically, the arrangement should serve North Halifax, and we shouldn't see too many extra district pupils come in unless, and in the unlikely scenario I would suggest at the moment, the preference from North Halifax was to go out of area, and that left surplus places, which invariably that school would fill by drawing from other parts of the borough. But I would suggest that's an unlikely scenario as things stand.
Could I just ask then, when we're looking at the proportion of A to D band,
and the obviously the element of what we get in throughout the testing and how that's proportioned up. How do we know which of those children are within the local community, which are within Calderdale as a whole, and which come out of borough? Or do we just get a group of information of how many tests have been taken and where they fall?
No, the local authority coordinate admissions, and what we do is most of the application is vetted by ourselves. So in terms of the assessment results, the assessments are carried out by the school and they send those results back to us. But we at the authority look at things like sibling links, which school they currently attend, and where they live. And we do the validation of the application form all around that. So there's no, for want of a better term, there's no scope for foul play on that score, because we, you know, as a neutral and coordinating the thing at the local authority, deal with that side of things. It's literally that we get the results back from the school and we allocate places on behalf of the school. So to that extent, the challenge, if there is a challenge, needs to be around the arrangements, where we think that perhaps they're not working fairly and they might breach the school admissions code.
And can I just ask again, sorry, I hope this is okay, Chair, just to clarify.
Carry on, Danielle.
How can we still list it as a non-selective school when the fair banding surely falls into selecting in some way? I understand it's not looking at the higher graded pupils, but it's a selection process either which way, is it not?
Shall I come in there, Richard, as well? It's part of the admissions criteria. So all the schools in some ways select on the admissions criteria, because where a school's oversubscribed, there has to be some criteria that determines who gets in. And for where there's fair banding in place, it's the admissions criteria. So it's not selection by ability. It's the admissions criteria, oversubscription criteria, and the banding is there to ensure that there's a representative intake for all levels of ability, so that it's not selective on the most able, and it doesn't discriminate against the least able. The places are apportioned according to those proportions of ability. So it's never planned in advance how many will get in at each band, because they have to see how many children are within each banding and then apportion the appropriate amount to that. So it's just the oversubscription criteria, but it's not selecting by ability.
Okay, Danielle.
Sorry, yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Were you indicating, Councillor, you were wrong, Helen?
Yes, if that's okay. Does anybody were ahead of me? Because I know I've already had a few bites of the cherry.
No, you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being involved with this for about 5 or 6 years and had several meetings with Trinity. Now, I think the concern, and we have this assurance, but how we can be sure this is that the fair banding would not take priority over the nearness to school and in terms of local children. So there would not be an instance where a child in a higher band who lived further away got a place in preference to a local child in a lower band. I don't know how we can be sure of that, but I know in one of its iterations, it seemed to be suggested that they would fill the bands first. And that could mean that, you know, although I accept it's not the same as selection, it could be selection, by in all but name, if somebody who was not getting a place on nearness to school got one because they were in band A. I think in the latest version we've been assured that wouldn't happen. But as you say, Trinity can set its own conditions, although I don't think it can become a selective school. I am right in saying that. I think my own view of fair banding is I think it can work okay if it's authority wide, and I know there's places where it is authority wide, and the idea is each school gets a balanced intake. Difficulty is we're obviously not going to get authority wise because we've got 2 selective schools, so your intake is skewed before you start. I would say though, in what I saw of the examples, is the majority of children were in the middle bands, and it was A and D that tended to be undersubscribed. I'm still not a fan of it, I have to admit. I do have concerns unless it's authority-wide, as I've said. I know we've had that assurance, but I don't know how we can ensure Trinity actually stick to that assurance and it doesn't become selection by the back door.
I think in answer to that, we must just monitor the position, and we do have a route. They are autonomous, and it is an admission arrangement that they've elected to adopt. The authority can't object on the grounds that it's not a particular fan of those arrangements. But if we can demonstrate that an area of deprivation is omitted by adopting a certain admission policy, then we can identify that disadvantage and we can challenge that through the Office of the School Adjudicator. So it is very much a case of keeping a watching brief and making sure that there's not unfair or no identified disadvantage by the arrangements that have been employed.
All right, thank you. I won't ask Helen if she's happy because she obviously isn't. I just have 2 points. In the papers 3.1.6, once the location and delivery site for Trinity's free school is finalised, blah, 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 admission arrangements will also be key in establishing what the impact of such provision will be. I have literally no idea what that means, but I guess you have, Richard.
Yeah, I've hopefully can answer that one for you. Yes, we don't know at the moment what the admission arrangements are going to be, and obviously the admissions code allows a range of admission arrangements to be adopted. So, for example, you can use feeder schools, you can use catchment areas, and each of those will potentially give you a different result. So, depending on where your catchment area is drawn, if you're given priority for admission in a catchment area, then what we would want to see as an authority is a fair catchment area, not one that goes through the nice leafy suburbs and omits, any areas of social housing. So that's what we're alluding to there in terms of what the admission arrangements might be in terms of an impact on the intake of pupils and the knock-on effect that would have for other schools potentially in the area.
Well, that's interesting. I do understand it now. And you're talking about Trinity Free School here, really, aren't you? And yes, the Trinity Free School area is going to be Brighouse, as I understand it.
The site is, whilst located, which is a government organisation for acquiring sites for free schools, is charged with finding a site. It's identified sites, and those are commercially sensitive at the moment because they're being acquired potentially, and so we're not really at liberty to say where at the moment that the site is likely to be.
South East Calderdale is where it's going to be.
I beg your pardon?
South East Calderdale. Isn't that the,
yes, yes.
Am I not supposed to know that?
No, but the specific site obviously has not been announced and identified. And given that we talked earlier about the final tiebreaker being distance and the different admission arrangements that you could have, there is the potential for that to impact on other schools in the area. So, for example, if it was located nearer to an existing school that was struggling, potentially it could draw pupils away from that school and create a problem for them. Ideally, there would be a sweet spot, but that isn't necessarily available in terms of a site that's big enough to accommodate a new secondary school. So it's finding a balance between what works in terms of location and the community it's intended to serve, and sites that are actually available and suitable for development.
Yeah, okay. Well, I live in Hippro, and if I looked out of the window that's in front of me at the moment, I could see 300 new houses being built. So that you look at 600 new kids, and yeah, I think that's very interesting. I just have one other point. Here it is. 3.3.4. Halifax Academy is oversubscribed, blah, blah, blah. A solution is possibly likely to lie within a neighbouring part of the borough in this instance. What is this solution? Am I being thick? Or you just not to, you just don't want to tell us?
Sorry, could you just say which paragraphs again, Chair? Sorry, I missed that.
3.3.4.
3.3.4.
The Halifax Academy is oversubscribed each year with demand exceeding places.
Yeah.
There are surplus places still at Trinity Academy Grammar, and some students from the West Central Halifax area also travel to Park Lane and Brooks Bank. So there, at the moment, the sufficiency of places is shared out between those other schools. And we do have capacity at Park Lane and at Trinity Academy Grammar.
Is that the solution? A solution is possibly likely to lie within a neighbouring part of the borough.
That's part of the solution. The other part is if we are able to expand the two form of entry in secondary in North Halifax, that will also alleviate some of the pressure. So we think with those places that are available, that would be the solution for West Central Halifax at the moment.
All right, thank you. Anything further, members? All right, good. Thank you, Richard. I expected the local plan to come up, but I wasn't Brexit was going to come up. I would have lost my bet on that one. Thank you for the report. Very interesting. Members are obviously deeply engaged, and yeah, very good report. Very good. Not without its controversies.
Indeed.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Richard. You can go now.
Thank you.
If you want, or you can stop and watch. We've got other interesting things to come.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 8, members. An update of the Children and Young People's Early Help Hub.
Thank you, Chair. Can I do a quick introduction to this? And then we've got a number of people who have come to talk to you tonight who are involved in the Early Help Hub rather than myself. So if I just give a really quick introduction, if I could just take people back to the beginning of COVID. As a senior leadership team, we made a decision at the beginning of COVID, and that was we had two decisions. One was, do we just sit back, batten the hatches and continue with maintaining services, or do we continue with our improvement journey and try and continue to ride out the pandemic and improve as we go along? We made a conscious decision that we felt we needed to continue with our improvement journey, and the Early Help Hub is one of our key elements to that. The Early Help Hub, we've mentioned it a number of times in different reports to Scrutiny, but this is the first time it's come as a substantive item. I have to say we're really pleased it's here. I think it's something we're really proud of, and I think it's a really good example of how strong the partnership is. So what I want to do is I'm going to introduce people who are involved in the Early Help Hub, and then rather than going through the report, which I think is hopefully self-explanatory, we'll open it up to questions straight away, so you can ask particularly the people who are involved in the Early Help Hub as it is. So can I just go around and ask people to introduce themselves? Sharon, do you want to start?
Good evening, members. Sharon Fields, Service Manager for Early Help and Targeted Support.
Okay, then we come to Brandon.
Yeah, good evening. Sergeant Brandon Greenwood from the Police Early Action Team.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Fran?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Fran Cochrane, Senior Key Worker, Early Help Hub.
Okay, and Kaz?
Hi, I'm Kaz Hughes-Dennis. I'm Early Help Key Worker.
And Rachel?
Yeah, good evening, members. My name's Rachel Brady. I'm the Team Manager of MAST.
I haven't missed anybody, have I? No, okay, good. Good. So if it's okay with you, Chair, should we open it straight out to questions?
Thank you. Yes, I thought this was a great report. It's very complicated, though. I struggle with the numbers quite a bit. But the first thing I'd like to ask, we've got a lot of guests here, and thanks for coming, by the way, everyone. Could somebody give me an example, or maybe two examples, of a referral that comes into MAST, the process where that's reverted to the Early Help Hub, and then how we decide which of the Early Help Hub members looks at it? By example, you don't have to name any names, obviously, but just give us a taste of how it actually works, what the mechanics of it are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yeah. Sharon, did you want to come do that one?
Yeah, I'll probably bring in other people as I go along. So a case will come through to MAST, so Rachel's team area. That case will be assessed, screened by MAST, and determined whether it meets children's social care threshold. And Rachel will be able to kind of discuss some of the cases in detail that come through there. Once that case has been kind of screened and they've been back to the parents and had the discussions with the parents about support that could be offered, consent is obtained to refer through to the Early Help Hub. So the Early Help Hub meets twice a week, and it's a multi-agency decision making. So in terms of the case coming through to the panel, it's not just one service area making the decision in terms of the service response, it's a multi-agency decision. All partners receive the details of the referral and the family details. They all check their own systems for any involvement in their areas, and all that information is brought back to that panel. We share the information, we discuss the needs of the families that have been identified, and then we allocate the most appropriate service based on that analysis of that need that's presenting from the referral and the historic information that's shared as part of the partnership. I'll hand over to Rachel, who'll be able to kind of talk you through some of the cases that may come through as part of the MAST into Early Help.
Thank you, Sharon. So obviously we get referrals from all points, from professionals, from families. So the process is that a manager will review the case and make a decision in terms of whether it meets Section 47 or if it needs to go straight through to screening to a social worker. So it'll get allocated to a social worker. As you're aware, we work on a consent basis. So we would always make sure that we contact parents, and what we're really pushing for at the moment in MAST is that we look at absent parents as well. So we're looking at both mother and father to get them involved to make sure we've spoken to them both. So a case will be screened, and obviously we work to the continuum of need in our threshold document. If a case, for example, if there's low level neglect, where the family just needs some support, it may be getting the children to school, there's low level issues in terms of child protection doesn't meet our 4 to 5 on our continuum of need, we will suggest that it goes to the Early Help Hub. Again, that we will explain what that means, that it goes to a multi-agency meeting, and it's not just the family support that can get involved. It's also, for example, Brandon's team, which is if there's behavioural problems for a child in the home. So a decision will be made, and we make a referral to Sharon's team, and then that case will be heard on a Monday and a Wednesday. So we always know what cases are going to be in, and everybody will have read the cases prior to the meeting, so they'll understand what the concerns are. And then a multi-agency decision will be made. I haven't brought any direct cases to sort of talk you through, but are we getting about 6 or 7, Sharon? I'm not sure what the numbers are.
Yeah, on average, I'd say we get about 6 or just around 6 a week to discuss. Fran, who's on the line, will be able to maybe talk to you about some of the issues that we're encountering in terms of the hub and some of the interventions that are offered through the teams that are part of that hub.
Sharon, can I just take a step back? Would it just be helpful to explain to the members which partners are at the Early Help Hub? Because I think we've got quite a strong partnership there. I wonder if we just take a step back and just describe the partners that are there.
Yeah, okay. So we've got a practice manager from MAST. So they always present the case into the hub because the referrals are only come via MAST. We've got the family intervention team who are delivering the family support based element of the hub. So we've got one of the workers on the line, which is Kaz. We've got liaison and diversion team that will support young people around emotional health and wellbeing, and any young people that are linked to criminal behaviour. We've got the police early action team that will offer brief interventions around criminalised behaviour, social media, lots of different things. The Sunnyvale Activity Centre. We've got the family group conferencing service. So, you know, we really want to use families as the professionals in their own lives. We want them to look at solutions that they might have in their extended family and how they can support each other. So we use the family group conferencing service. And we also have the early help pathway team that will start multi-agency early help assessments. So we get a team around the child and family as well. So they're kind of a range of agencies that are currently part of the early help hub.
Something I'm not 100% clear. You got 6 a week. Is that what you're saying? Or 6 to every meeting? That's 12 a week. 6 a week. And yet there was in the period
6 a week.
Yeah, that's a small number, I would have thought. Is that right? Because 9,000 over 9,000 a year last year. That's 177 a week. And only 6 of them are coming to the early help of it.
Can I just?
I realise that's news.
Can I just step in? Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
There may be only 6 cases, but obviously we count our contacts by each child that comes in. So even though the panel is only talking about 6 cases, if we broke it down to how many children there were, that would be a different number. Because we discuss it by the family within the hub, whereas within MAST we count on every child that comes in. So that's why the figures won't quite match up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still struggling to grasp it. But one of the
sorry, Chair. Can I just
carry on, Sharon.
So we started the hub in June last year. So the data that you've got for the hub in the report is from June last year up until the end of Q2 this year. So end of October, Q2 this year. So within that time frame, we've had 454 children that have been discussed at the hub, which is 219 families. You will see from the report the resource that we've got in the hub we didn't have any additional resource. We've just kind of realigned some of the existing resource that we had within the family intervention team as part of that, and we've brought in our partners. So although MAST might receive 9,000 contacts, not all of them will come through to the hub, because some of those cases will be that MAST will advise for existing early help partners to start the pathway, or they'll advise to go through to the early intervention panel. The purpose of the hub is to provide immediate support to those families where they've deemed that actually there's multiple needs that have been identified. They're not at that threshold of tier 4 to 5, but if we don't get involved, you know, quite quickly and offer some support, they will escalate. So purpose of the hub is to look at those cases where MAST feel they need immediate support, rather than waiting, going through the existing pathways that we've got in place.
Yeah, I think we're all very much in favour of early help as early as possible. We used to call it early intervention. Now we're doing it really early intervention. If you look at the numbers in 2.2 outcomes, as members of this panel know, outcomes is my favourite word. These are fantastic outcomes. And we've really asked for this report because we've noticed the enormous decrease in children in need plans and child protection plans. And what we want to see is a link between those numbers going down and the early help up. Now, I'm not sure I've really got the mechanics of it, but it's obviously working, because those numbers in 2.2.4 and 2.2.3 are fantastic. But if it's so good, why ain't everybody doing it? Why aren't we all driving the numbers down? And how much better can we get?
I think, Chair, that's the exact. I suppose that's the question we pose on a regular basis. I think we know that this is being successful. We can evidence it's been successful. I think the outcomes. You're absolutely right. There's some amazing outcomes there, and when you start to measure the outcomes at 3 months and 6 months, and soon we'll be able to measure it at 9 months and 12 months. You can see that actually the outcomes are good and the sustained outcomes as well. So we can see that. I think the question around why everybody's not doing it, I think it's a fairly simple one actually. Early help is an area where we know when things get tough, it gets de-invested in nationally. We know that's the issue. So what we've tried to do here is we've tried to use this almost, I called it a road test, to test the new way of working, to see if it's something that we could evidence and has an impact. I think what we're hoping you'll see there is evidence that this will have an impact. But just to put it in context, because Sharon's absolutely right, this isn't a new resource we've got. This is an existing resource that we've asked to work in a slightly different way. So Brandon and all the others give their time to the early help hub on top of their day job. And we've still evidence that there is a big impact we can make there. The early help hub just meets twice a week for a couple of hours. So that's the total impact. That's the total sum of what we do at the moment. And we're still making an impact. So I suppose if we push that forward in terms of what could we do next, I suppose the options are limitless really, but it does depend on the resource that's available and how do we do that. So I suppose part of the scenario we're continuing to think through is how do we invest more into early help to prevent more children coming through into social care, while we're managing big demand in social care as well. So there's a competing demand there that we need to keep pushing. But I think what we are able to evidence is that this model is working quite well at the moment. The next iteration is that we want to move to a point where cases don't need to come into MAST before we intervene and offer this early help offer. Because actually at the moment they're coming in, they're being screened by MAST, and then they're coming to the early help hub for us to take them back out again. We want to work towards a model where we're sat before the front door, where cases that need social worker escalated through quickly and they receive the support from MAST really quickly. But cases that need that slightly lower level support, we can pick up before the front door and actually be able to intervene even quicker. But I suppose it will all depend on the resource that we have and how that resource is positioned really. So I think there's some huge potential here. We are still seeing this as a road test. We were really clear that we didn't want to jump in and say, this is going to solve everything. We needed to test it out. And I suppose we're just at the point now where we've got the reports now, we've got the data that's starting to suggest some really, really good outcomes there. But we think we could do more if we position it in a slightly different way. And, if we met every day of the week, would that be different? If we start to screen referrals coming through to MAST in a slightly different, could we do different? But I suppose ideally where we'd want to be is sat right before the front door and working really closely with schools and things like that to be able to identify early help cases at a much earlier stages where we want to get to. But that's me just rabbiting on now, so I'll apologise for that.
Yeah, I have another question, but I'll go to Sarah first. Sarah,
thanks, Colin. Yeah, so so it's just a sort of question really. If a family came along and it's one of the, I can't remember if it was Rachel or Sharon mentioned earlier about their family that needed a bit of help, a bit of support getting kids to school on time, or if you sort of identified a family that maybe were the child wasn't in danger, but it was just a sort of like not quite functional in terms of maybe things like shopping and cooking, or sort of like that sort of physical making a family work type help. So would that be something that could be actioned through is that something that would be actioned through the sort of the family, the early help hub? But Barry, and if it was and it was identified that maybe a bit of extra help with sort of shopping or a bit of cleaning or whatever would be the thing that would actually really take the pressure off that family, would that be something that could then continue sort of post 12 weeks? Because obviously you've got a 12-week cut off for help. Could that be something that's sort of gone, would that work, or would that not be sort of something that would go to the Family Help Hub, or is that not a scenario that comes up?
Do you want to answer, Sharon?
Yeah, well, it could be, but it depends on the level of need for that family. If it's just routines and boundaries, then it may not come through to the hub. We might be looking at our locality family support teams doing that piece of work. But I could, if I bring in Cass Dennis, because she's one of our key workers, and Cass could give you a little bit of a flavour about what work she would do around supporting parents.
Yeah,
Cass?
Hi. Yeah, so just to give a couple of examples, to give a bit of a flavour of the type of work which we do. My background is in terms of family intervention, so it's very family based, and it's very much tailored to the needs of the individual family who comes into the hub, and it's an immediate response which we offer. So I think, as it already said, we offer a response within 48 hours, so it is very quick, and that response can last up to 12 weeks generally. So, for example, I've had a case recently where mum was, a single parent, was referred by a health professional who was concerned because she was having blackouts and fits, and she's got 2 small young children. So my role was then to go in and to do some safety work with mum in terms of keeping children safe if she was to have a blackout whilst they were in her care, and to do some home safety work with her. And also I got some charitable funding to get a care line system set up, so if she did have a blackout and fell, then the alarm would go to a family member who could come and help. So it was a short-term intervention, and just to provide that support. Other cases, which you, like what you mentioned, Sarah, we might make referrals on, so we might do some intervention, for example, around routines, home conditions, those kind of things, boundaries, potty training, whatever. But if it's felt that there's a need for longer term support, then we might make a referral into the family support team, the locality based family support team. We also set up the early help pathways, which are a bit like the old common assessment framework with the tax. So we'll get other agencies involved, for example, school or nursery and health, and any other services, and get parents on board to set up the meetings, facilitate the first meeting, and then get other professionals to continue with that process moving forward once our intervention finishes.
I think, Councillor Corney, one of the things I think is the most important bit, and I think you picked up on the key question there, is at the end of 12 weeks, the intervention doesn't stop if there's an ongoing need. But what we do is we make sure that the right professional is then involved with that family to take that forward. And I think that's really important, because this is about families that, if we don't do something, will come back into social care. So these are not the lower level cases, because they would normally go to the early intervention panel, which is planned, and we can pick up that way from there. This is a really to stop cases that we know if we don't do something now, they will come back in a couple of months' time and they'll come back into social care. So that's where it's pitched at the moment. So it's quite a selective group, I suppose, at the moment. That's why it relies really heavily on MAS doing a really well, screening really well. But what we've been able to evidence that if we get that intervention right, that the vast majority of them don't come back into MAST. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to see as one of the most positive outcomes, because we've been able to evidence that really clearly now, but not just for they don't come back in a couple of weeks, they don't come back in 3 months, and don't come back in 6 months currently. We've been able to evidence that. So I suppose that's where we're pitching this at the moment. But I suppose what we're trying to do is look at all the options going forward in terms of how do we develop this as an approach going forward. I think the key bit around the partners that are involved, and maybe it'd be really useful for the police maybe to talk about some of the interventions that they offer, because there are a range of interventions that can be offered through the Early Help Hub, and that's why it's really important that the partnership is really strong, because for some of them, the best people to respond will be the police because of the resources that they have. So I don't know if, Brandon, if you could just talk about some of the cases that you might pick up through the Early Help Hub.
I was coming to Brandon next, so.
Okay, sorry.
one of the important things about all these early intervention hubs and all the teamwork that goes around is buy-in from all the partners. But I think if Sergeant Greenwood or Brandon, if I call you Brandon, if you'd like to explain the police's attitude to this sort of, we had an excellent presentation from a police officer. I don't know if it was you, maybe 18 months ago. I think we were all very impressed with him. These don't work unless everybody buys. Yeah. Oh well, thank you. I didn't remember you, but we had a really good presentation. So what I'd like to just reiterate the buy-in argument, and then if you could give us a couple of examples, as Rob said, about the type of interventions or the pathway that you're going to use.
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing really is to deal with the problems is having the information, and not all the partners have all the information, and that's sort of one of the great things about the hub, is that information share puts a little bit of clarity on understanding why somebody's perhaps doing something or why something's breaking down. You know, sometimes we're sat with that information. Sometimes children's social care are sat with information. So when we bring that information together, it helps us identify what's perhaps the cause, as opposed to tackling the symptom all the time. In relation to what we can offer, we do educational inputs. You know, there's that shock factor of, and some of the sort of more common cases are perhaps children who are becoming a bit more difficult to manage at home. So you have parental relationship problems, children starting to maybe assault parents, or go down that line where parents then contact children's social care rather than the police and say, look, we've got a problem here, I can't cope. And then obviously the information share that we have, we'll be able to then maybe say at the meeting, and these are just examples, these aren't specific cases, but it might be quite a common theme that there's quite a lot of domestic violence in that house. So that puts a little bit more information and understanding as to perhaps why there is a breakdown, why is a young male being the way he is towards his parents. And then it's about then delivering the right level of service to that. Some of the things we offer, we do, you know, we do activities with some of the more prolonged cases where they're a bit more complex, where maybe the young person's not talking. So we try and break down those barriers so they lower the guard and then perhaps open up. And then we get that information. So then there's more information available to share with partners to help make better decisions on interventions. So we've got educational inputs about consequences of crime, county lines, drugs, substance misuse, ASB, knife crime. And these are all things that we could tap into, either delivering one-off educational inputs or design a package that's bespoke to an individual to try and assist on a longer term whilst other services are doing their bit.
Is that it? I can't hear now, Brian.
Yeah.
All right.
There is a slight delay.
There is. I don't know. It's probably my Wi-Fi. Again, I'll go back to that. It seems to me that the police have bought into this. So this has benefits to it as well as the rest of the benefits. You're quite a senior man, you're Sergeant. Are the upper echelons of the police behind this?
Yeah, I was listening to what you were saying about, you know, it's a road test. For the police, it's a little bit different, really, because we are trying to change the culture of catch and convict. Now, we've been doing this now 3 years, and if we deal with the problem and not the symptom, then in the same scenario that the early helper works, we stop things becoming a problem. So if we tackle, say, for instance, somebody who's committing, somebody's stealing things, but they're stealing things because they're taking drugs, but they're taking drugs because there's been a bereavement, and it's maybe that's the way of coping. Unless we sort out the bereavement, say, there's no point in tackling the crime. So we are trying to change a culture, and it's still ongoing, because the catch and convict is what police have done for many, many years. Is you know, when we get a conviction, it's a great result. Well, is it? Or if they don't get them this time, they'll come again. Well, we don't want them to come again, but it's try to change maybe a policing mentality. And the chief's now really on board with this and has written a new paper on early action. So there is investment now. All districts have got an early action team. We're quite fortunate that because we've been going for 3 years, they've actually based the model of which we use to try and deliver early action. And quite simply, all we do is we identify every 24 hours a young person that's involved in a crime or perhaps gone missing. And then we look to offer some intervention in relation to every single of those incidents. So we offer that up to every single officer in the case, that once you're at the state of finalisation of the crime, regardless of the outcome, send us a referral, and then we sit down at the table, very similar as to we do at the hub, and try and identify what the cause of the offending is. And then we throw the right level of service at it. Not necessarily it's not just the police, because perhaps we're not the best people to deliver some of the service that they need. But we're sat with liaison diversion, who are signposting and holding service, who can identify key services to help with the problem. But we've also got access with YGS, they're part of that hub as well. But it's a very similar model. But you're quite right. We are trying to change a culture. Fortunately now, this current chief has really bought into early action, but in the same respects to the early help hub, it's perhaps not as invested in as well as it could be, with the benefits that we do get from it. But they've got a front door to service as well. So when them 3 9s are called, they've got to have enough staff to go to those, because they're the most important.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm quite encouraged. Councillor Courtney, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm not expecting necessarily a positive answer about this, but so that's all been sort of very encouraging. Thanks, Kaz, for those examples. That was really helpful to give a proper picture of how things are working, and thank you as well, Brandon, for that as well. It's really good. So sometimes, and it's been mentioned in the report about poverty often being can be a cause of families struggling one way and another. I think that's not a sort of massive surprise. Obviously, the cost of children going into care is huge for us. Are there any sort of options of financial help to sort of supplement people on especially while they're just sort of getting themselves together, if that's something that could be seen to help alleviate the struggle that they're having, like if even if it's just sort of like on a short-term basis, in order to, if that is something that would help prevent maybe a child going into care, if that was sort of identified as a need, either sort of some direct financial help or some sort of support in other ways that would help that as an issue, if it was sort of some problems due to poverty. Would that ever be, do you see, you know what I'm sort of trying to say, I guess, I hope. So it's just, is that something that is there a way of sort of practical help to help families that end up sort of struggling and coming through to the hub, or coming through sort of like massed and into the hub, where actually some practical, I guess you can't just give people money necessarily. I don't know, maybe you can. Is that ever something that's sort of talked about or looked at?
Do you want me to come in there? I think, Councillor Courtney, there are a number of things that we can do. I mean, we're not able to give financial support to people, apart from through Section 17, where children are likely to come into care and we can provide financial support. But that's quite limited, really. But I suppose what we can do, and I think what we've been able to evidence through the hub, is for most families, it's being aware of what support is available and making sure that they're linked into the right support in their communities. And sometimes your financial support is a really difficult thing to bring up with families. Sometimes it's not often the thing that families identify, but when we look at it from a professional perspective, it is often a key theme that runs through a lot of the work that we do, and that's at most levels. Actually, I would say not just at this level here; it's at most levels. So I think the signposting to the right support services is really critical. And again, Sharon or one of the others will be able to talk about some of the services that we work with really closely. We can obviously link people into food banks and things like that, and we've done that really successfully. I suppose the more we can do at that early end to support families to move away from their difficulties is what we're trying to aim for here, really. And we know that the earlier we can get involved in a problem, the better the outcomes can be as well. So I think the whole ethos behind the early help is to intervene at an earlier stage to prevent problems occurring. But often that requires a much bigger partnership. So some of the things that we would have talked about here is that we work very closely with the housing department. We work really close with the benefits agency. There's a whole range of agencies we'll work with, citizens advice, and all of them agencies are available for us to support families. But the difficulty we always have is we've got to have that relationship with families first. And then the key bit around the early help hub is it gives us the opportunity to build a relationship and then support families to access that support that's needed. So I think that's one of the key elements. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, could I just come in? Sorry.
Yes.
Coming from a mass perspective, I mean, as you're aware of the number of contacts that we have, I can count on one hand. I've been managing mass now for 8 years, and I can probably count on maybe one hand or maybe two where a family has actually contacted us saying, I want money. What we get is I need support with my child's behaviour. I need help with getting my children to school. It's always social issues. It's very rare that they actually say, I need money. And part of our help might be, as Rob says, giving them information in terms of going to food banks, accessing where there's a youth club, where they can get mental health support for their family. But it's very rare we get the question, I need money. So I do really think it's the services that we offer within Calderdale that support our families. And I think what we do offer, even if it is just directing to a website for mental health, what we provide is what our families need, and we do listen to what they want, and we do provide as well as we can.
Yeah, I wasn't sort of suggesting that people were coming and asking for money, but I suppose it's more that it's like if there's a family that, you know, is sort of, you know, that around, you know, maybe sort of schools have brought up around children maybe being, you know, not very well looked after physically in terms of, you know, cleanliness or clothes and that sort of thing, or, you know, and you know, sort of, I don't know, dog mess, or, you know, in a kitchen, or, you know, there's you know, like lots of different things can occur that actually, like if the family had enough money, would, you know, or a family in another sort of circumstance might employ a cleaner or something like that, you know. But so I didn't mean that necessarily people were asking for money, but just where money actually, the injection of a service, I suppose, rather than just money itself, might alleviate that problem, which actually that might then help that family situation. I suppose that's what I was alluding to, really, rather than money directly as much as anything. But thank you. Thanks, Rachel.
I was just going to come in there, Sarah. So there are a range of options for families that are experiencing financial difficulties. As Rob said, often it's when you've built that relationship with the family that they are able to share their financial difficulties. So examples are referrals to CAB. We've had families where we've referred for debt relief orders that have been successful. We refer to charities such as Mothershare and Lighthouse. We liaise closely with our dedicated employment and benefits advisor. So there are a range of options that we use to support families that have financial difficulties.
Thank you. Now I had two officers indicating, but they've both taken the flags down. So unless I want to comment now, I'm going to go to Councillor Foster. Dot.
Thanks, Chair. This is a really interesting report, and I'm always really encouraged as to how effective the Early Help Hub is, and the links with MAST. I think it's a really, really valuable service that potentially saves the council a huge amount of money by getting in there before more substantive measures are needed to be taken, such as taking children into care and so on. What I was wondering was, I think from what I've read, the families are able to self-refer, and I'd be grateful if you could confirm whether or not my presumption on that is true. And if so, what sort of percentage of families self-refer, and where do the largest majority of referrals come from? I appreciate there's a vast array of different potential referees, if that's right. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know a little bit more about where those come from and whether families can self-refer. So I think they can, but I'm not quite sure. Thank you.
Sharon, did you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so families can't self-refer because the referrals are just via MAST. So it's anybody that refers into MAST that's considered for the early help hub. So families do self-refer themselves to MAST, or family members refer through to MAST. So there is a route in that way. In terms of the number of referrals and which agencies, we do track the initial referral into MAST, who's the agency that's referred in. And there is a high percentage from the last data that we did that are police referrals, and that learning is taken back through Brandon as part of the hub to feed that back, because we do realise there's probably cases that are being referred through to MAST that don't really need to be referred through to MAST, can be met through an early help offer. So Brandon takes that learning back. And then we do have a lot of families that have referred themselves or family members through to MAST. And again, that's part of that vision that Rob's described, that actually families are having to come through to MAST to get the service, whereas actually we would want to kind of position ourselves a little prior to MAST so they can get that advice and support without having to actually come into MAST.
Thank you. That's a really helpful clarification. And I think what's really good to know is that families there is somewhere for families to go when they say they recognise that they need help and they can ask for it. And I think that's really positive, very important actually. Because
what else you got?
There's some background noise going on there. So yeah, I think it's really helpful.
Apologies, my daughter came in. I didn't realise I wasn't on mute.
No worries.
No problem.
Yeah.
Just to help that out, I think there is a list somewhere. I've seen it before of the percentage of referrals by schools, health, blah blah blah. It should be easily attainable if somebody could get that for us, Rob. I think that would be
could do that
to us all. Just answer. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Can I just say it's that information is in the weekly demand graph. If you go into the source of contacts, it will tell you what we get into MAST. It won't tell you what goes into the hub, the help hub. It will tell you what comes into MAST.
Yeah, a breakdown.
Sorry, Councillor. Just to jump in there, Dot, we had 45 referrals received from MAST within the first 12 months where the family had referred in themselves.
Yeah, I think we're talking about. Oh, right, okay. Look, we could get an overall picture. I'm sure that information is readily available. Just distribute it to the members. I'll give it to Lauren or Sophie. Diana.
Yeah, just a really quick one actually. It's really interesting report. Thank you. And looking at the tracking in terms of the indicators, that's really useful, I think, to have that specific detail, and it's helpful in terms of showing the need and the value of what this offers. And some of that's really easy to track and got really specific examples, which is just really, really helpful. I might be missing something. One of the indicators seemed to be missing, and I want to know where it is and what's happened to it. It was the child in need one, I think, in that section 2.3. All the other indicators were covered, and I wondered if it was just missing for a reason or just because it had been forgotten. It may be that it overlaps with some of the other ones as well.
Sorry, no, we do have indicator on that. So it's about the looking at the number of families that have had a multi-agency early help assessment previous to 6 months coming through to the hub. And then we track them after closure as well. So just for data, 13 young people had been identified as having an early help assessment prior to coming into hub. 8 have been tracked at 6 months after closure. And what we found was 2 that were subject to single assessment, 3 that were subject to child in need, 2 had remained closed, and 1 had gone through for early help support. And we also have another indicator around the number of young people that have had massed inquiries. But I can let you have that data if you'd like an outcome measure on that one.
No, it was just kind of just wondering kind of if it was meant to be there. Like that. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I think the detail is really helpful there. Thank you.
Apologies. We do have a number of indicators under each headline problem. So I didn't want to overload you with data and outcomes.
We love data and outcomes. Last point on this, I'm going back to really what Sarah said, only I won't go and push it out a little bit bigger. If we're saying we're reducing children in need and CPPs, and we're hoping, I assume that eventually children looked after numbers will come down, where's the strategic vision for this? If I like to relate things to real work, if you like. Rob, you said it's a sort of trial run, a dry run, if you like. If you're developing something new, you usually plan to make some sort of investment in the future. Now, the whole idea of this is presumably to reduce the number of children looked after, which costs on average, last time I knew the number was £55,000 a year. Where in the budget proposals for next year or the year after are the benefits of this strategy to be overcome? And would we be better off, if we're sure we're going to be successful, which we certainly seem to be, and we're going to achieve the results we want, why aren't we moving budget from one area into another and investing in this one?
So that's a very complicated question. So again, in terms of we made the conscious decision to call it a road test rather than a pilot. A pilot suggests you've got a model that you just want to try out. I suppose what we wanted to do in the first year is to try out a range of different things. So what we've done is we've changed it as we've progressed. So if we've found something doesn't work, we've changed it. So we've done that. I think the idea is that we would then present back to the safeguarding board to say we've done this piece of work as a small partnership, and what are the options going forward, really. I think what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to say this is something we know that what's going to be the outcome until we've done it. So I think it's really important we did the piece of work. I think it is still very early days, but I think it does show some really strong evidence of being successful. I think the other thing that we just need to try and align it to is the government are really committed to developing what's called family hubs, and where we are trying to pitch this is our step into developing a family hub for Calderdale as well, in developing family hubs in Calderdale, which would require a different partnership response, really, because that would include all partners. That's not just the children's social care thing. That's something that requires all partners to be committed to that. But I think the route through that would be into oh, sorry, I think Julie wants to come in, Chair.
Julie.
Sorry, Rob, I didn't want to interrupt you. I was quite happy for you to carry on. Yeah, I just wanted to come in quickly to say, you're absolutely right, Councillor Roaster. We're spending so much at the top end, as you know, for children in care. We've been very good, I think, through all of the investment that we've made and the police have made in kind of, bucking some of the trends that we're seeing nationally, in a huge rise in child protection cases, children in need and children in care. So as you've seen tonight from the report, the numbers have come down, but the numbers of children in care have remained relatively stable, while other local authorities are seeing a huge increase. And that is really kind of, tipping budgets on the head, where more and more is being spent on looked after children placements, as you know, and we've got the investment from yourselves agreed at full council to invest in our internal residential, which will really help, maintain some of the spend that we can make in early help services. We know the more that we spend down the bottom end, you just see so much gain at the top end, in terms of outcomes, children living with their families being supported and stronger. So anything that we could do to move the budgets from the top end of Rob's budget down to the bottom end, we take opportunities, but it's also for the partnership, and the Health and Wellbeing Board are very much committed to early intervention, prevention, supporting families, to make healthy choices and to get the help they need at a much earlier level. So I think it's, as we've said before, we've got to keep children safe, we've got to keep children in care. Those costs are going up, but whatever we can make savings at the top, Rob will try and pull them down and reinvest them at, this bottom end. Sharon's team's put quite a lot of resource into this from the youth service, from the youth offending team, from the family intervention team, and along with a significant investment from West Yorkshire Police. You're seeing some really positive outcomes here, and I think if we were awash with money, we'd put more and more into this because we're seeing the impact and the outcomes, but we've got to keep things safe at both ends. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Julia. It's a bit of a risk there. What I would say about money is if you don't ask, you don't get. And if you can show that something is going to work, it's worth investing in. I know the council is consistently saying we've no money, but if you can argue that £1 million here saves £500,000 there, or £1 million here saves £1 million there, it might cost us a year to get there, then it's, I don't want to be critical, but it's a question of believing in your vision, really. If that's what we believe in, make the case. Anyway, that's my contribution to the politics of the evening. That was a very interesting, and maybe we'll ask Adam about that later. That was a very interesting report. I think members have commented it was very interesting. I don't want to say I'm excited, but I actually am quite excited. If it works and we can prove it works, and the future can look very different to what it is now.
Chair,
can I just say a very quick thank you as well? I just think it is brilliant work, and it's hugely appreciated on behalf of all the sort of young people of the borough. Definitely, I'm sure that all the members would agree.
Yeah, I think we're so outcome focused that, and that's where we should be. I'd like to see. I'd like it to be more evangelical about it, is what I'm trying to say. Rather than saying, this is what we're doing. If we're doing something really good that has overall benefits, not just in outcomes, but in the way we apportion the money we've got available, let's be more, I don't think anybody around this table has probably heard of Billy Graham, but let's be a bit more Billy Graham about it. All right, members. Again, thank you for the report. Very interesting.
Just saying I had, Chair.
Sorry, Helen.
Heard of Billy Graham.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. All right, I think he ended up disgracing himself, didn't he? But anyway, let's hope we're not going down that route. Thank you very much for that report. And Sergeant Brando, thank you very much for coming, and all the rest of the guests. You can all go and get your dinner now. I always make that comment around about 8 o'clock when all the other members are all starving. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 9. Julie's going to tell us how we're all going to spend all our money on early intervention.
You've actually got the budget on the agenda next time, members. It's on the work programme, as you know, and this item is around the Cabinet priorities, which are 2 items. One is around education recovery and one is actually around school places. And Richard's given you a full briefing on that tonight. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Wilkinson, who's going to make the introduction to the presentation, and Leslie's going to take you through a little bit of the detail around the education recovery plan.
Thank you. Oh. Sorry, when you started the presentation, I lost my notes then. Thank you, Julie. I mean, yeah. So obviously in June, the new administration agreed a number of priorities and a number of actions that we believe would quickly make a difference to local people, our economy, and to tackling the climate emergency. And we've actually got a report going to Cabinet on Monday, which sets out the significant progress that we've made in the last 6 months in delivering those priorities and our Vision 2024. Hopefully you're all familiar with Vision 2024, but perhaps if there's new members, just basically our vision for our children and young people is that we want them all to be healthy, safe and successful. And we want them all to have good outcomes when they come to the end of secondary school. And I'm pleased to say that a significant proportion of our young people do. And obviously want them then to continue to flourish as they move into further education, employment or training. So as I say, at the start of the year, we set out our priorities as an administration, and these were reducing inequalities, the climate emergency and sustainable towns. And with each of these, there were some key pieces of work identified that would help us deliver those ambitions. And as Julie says, the two key areas of work for CYP were to develop a strategic place planning for schools, which you've heard a lot about already this evening, and to deliver the comprehensive education COVID recovery plan. So our COVID recovery work with schools actually started even before the government announced its own programme of work. And whilst that work is really important for all our children, it's even more important for those from low-income families, because all the evidence shows that they're the ones that have fallen back the most in terms of their education and their well-being. It's also really important for our SEND children, because we know a lot of families do really struggle to sort of access the support and education that they needed during lockdown. So there's several strands to the work which Leslie's going to take you through, and it does have a sort of focus on well-being and mental health as well, not just catching up academically, which is obviously important, but not the be-all and end-all. And before Leslie takes over, I'd just like to again put on record my thanks for all the hard work and resilience of our schools, our early years providers and colleges during the pandemic, which has obviously been the most challenging of circumstances, and just really hope that this new variant is not going to mean that we see a lot of our children out of education for a prolonged period of time again. And just finally, also just to mention that I think the working relationship between our schools and our officers, both in CYP and public health, has been absolutely exceptional. So I'll hand over to Leslie, if that's okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. So yes, with the Education Recovery Programme, as Councillor Wilkinson just said, we started work on this well ahead of the national programme for education recovery. And we identified 4 key strands for the work. They are encompassing an awful lot of work that's ongoing and always has been going on within Calderdale, but with a real focus on that, on an even more robust drive, I would say, to reduce inequalities, because the gaps have widened for many of our children. The first strand is around education recovery, and we've got a large piece of work going on. We're working with a steering group that's made up of representatives from all our school clusters, from our curriculum hub, so our English hub and our maths hub and the music hub, and also from our local research school and teaching school hub. And they have oversight of the whole programme. But within that, then, for each strand, we have a number of working parties that are leading on specific work streams. Within the education recovery, there's a lot of our work around early years. So our early years strategy is very much part of the strand 1. So that's making sure that we're doing everything possible to close those inequality gaps well before children start school. So it's not just a school response, but it's starting actually pre-birth, working with families. But then as we come through into schools, we've got a range of support going on, and some of that is national. So we've got the National Tutoring Programme, and we've also got the Academic Mentors Programme. Unfortunately, this year, Calderdale doesn't meet the criteria for the Academic Mentors Programme. That's the local authorities identified for that were the ones that were had the weakest standards as judged by Ofsted. So that's namely the areas in England with the lowest proportion of pupils attending good or outstanding schools. So it's a positive that we weren't identified for that, but our schools are missing out on accessing that. But nonetheless, they're able to access the tutoring programme, and that's changed slightly this year so that schools can now employ their own tutors, which was always something that our schools in Calderdale wanted to do. And all the schools who are eligible are working with the tutoring programme in one form or another to make sure their children benefit from that. We're also, we have a considerable amount of funding that's come into schools. So over £1 million has been paid to Calderdale schools for the school-led tuition that I've just spoken about, along with about 1.3 million for the recovery premium, and just short of 11 million for pupil premium. And all that money can be used to support the education recovery. So to do that, we're working with our clusters. All our clusters have action plans that are addressing their the priorities within their own cluster. And then we have a Calderdale-wide development programme in place that's focused on high quality professional development, very much about closing those gaps. So looking at the disadvantaged children, we've got some research programmes going on, working with Huddersfield University and also with the Education Endowment Foundation to really make sure that we have got well planned and implemented plans in place that we're evaluating to understand the impact of that. We've also got some funding that we've allocated, additional funding to the clusters to help with that work. So we had an additional £340,000 this year. So some of that has gone directly to the clusters for their work, and they're accountable to the Calderdale Partnership School Improvement Board for the spend of that. But then an element of that 340,000 also came to the Partnership Board, so that groups of schools or individual schools or clusters can bid for specific pieces of work where additional funding is needed. And we're already seeing a number of quite exciting projects underway to have some direct impact on children. Alongside that, there's work going on around special educational needs and inclusion, as I've already spoken about. And that's a really important piece of work that would have been doing regardless of COVID, but is fundamental to our work. It's very much about closing those gaps for our special needs children. It links so closely with the work we've just been hearing about early intervention, so that we're identifying need as early as possible and working to look at the underlying causes. So whether that's special educational needs or children looked after or disadvantaged children, looking at that wider picture and how we can work with families to get that support in early. Strand 2 is looking at the well-being of children and young people, but also of staff. We recognise that if we don't have a resilient, a highly skilled and sustainable workforce, then we're not going to have that long-term impact on children and young people's outcomes. So there's a lot of work going on to do with well-being. For children and young people, much of that is focused through our Open Minds partnership, and also some work that's going on with many of our schools in the mental health support teams in schools programme, and that's expanding all the time, and it is proving to be successful in addressing the needs of children directly through work within their schools. The work for staff is also, the work stream there includes a coordinator from the Department for Education's workload reduction group. They're due to publish the revised workload reduction toolkit. We'd hope that would be out by now. And we recently held a conference for schools, including governors, to look at wellbeing. We'd hoped to have the toolkit at that event, but it's been delayed. So we have another conference booked in March, and we'll be sharing that toolkit there as part of that strand. Strand 3 is looking at workforce development, working with our local teaching school hub and research school to make sure that our workforce is really highly skilled. That's starting from the early years workforce and going all the way through to post-16. That includes the early career framework, which is a 2-year programme now that's replaced the work that used to be for newly qualified teachers and recently qualified teachers. Now there's a 2-year programme for them, and our school effectiveness team are leading on some of that work for their support. We also are running national qualifications. So the Teaching School Hub has got a range of qualifications, and that includes for early years and through the school workforce as well. The final strand, strand 4, is a really big piece of work, and this is around digital inclusion. You'll be aware that we had a really successful fundraising campaign during the pandemic last year to make sure that we supplemented the DFE provision for laptops and access to the internet for disadvantaged children. And we made sure that every child that needed that support had it within Calderdale. But it's a much longer term piece of work, because although we could provide the laptops and devices for children, and we could provide internet access for a short period of time, internet access going forwards is something that's got to be looked at across the whole community and across the region. So we're working with regional partners and with our digital transformation team to look at the borough-wide response. This isn't a school response. This is very much looking at how we can make sure families across the borough have access to digital resources, as more and more things that they need to do, not just for education, but accessing a whole range of support is done digitally. So those are the 4 strands. If we could just have the next slide, please. The next thing obviously is around holiday hunger, and we've had real success around this, that we've had effective support for children and families provided through the holiday activities and food funding that came from national government, but also that's been supplemented by our Never Hungry Again campaign within Calderdale, and also through some of the grants that have been made available for household support. And I'm really pleased to say that the Healthy Holidays funding has been provided and guaranteed for next year as well, and also that we've been able to continue providing the household grants. So families had a direct payment for the October half-term period, and they'll also be getting a further grant for over the Christmas holidays, and that's a direct payment that helps with food, fuel and other essential costs over winter. Those are real success stories, and again, a great piece of joined up working where we've got people from the voluntary sector, from schools and early years providers, from council services, and the wider community to really come together and co-produce that work. Another piece of work I touched on earlier, and strand 1, is around the speech, language and communication pathway. We had a report to Scrutiny earlier on this year looking at the progress that's being made following the early years peer challenge last year, and a big piece of that is the speech, language and communication pathway. And as you know, we've got a large number of schools taking part in the early language development programme, and that's feeding into the bespoke pathway for Calderdale children that again is being co-produced. We have got 2 consultants leading on that, and that work's progressing well now. It's very much got a health focus, so the CCG are involved with it, and public health. And by January, we should be in a position where we're able to share the pathway that will really have, make sure we've got really carefully coordinated and planned support at universal, targeted and specialist support levels for children, because we know that speech, language and communication is an area that has really been impacted during the pandemic, and one where those inequalities gaps are wider than ever. Could just have the next slide, please. Feel like Professor Chris Whitty saying that. I touched earlier on the work around our children with special educational needs. And we've got a restructure going on, as you know, of our specialist inclusion services. Ben Alchin reported on that at the last scrutiny board. That restructure is well underway now. The consultation period's ended, and that will give us a much more agile and responsive service that can adapt to the needs of children and make sure that we're responding really quickly to any changing needs. Part of that work is also a review of our alternative provision, and we've got an external consultant carrying out that piece of work. We're getting some headline feedback on that now, and we're expecting the report by the end of December. And that's going to help us really develop our work, not just for children with special needs, but also where we're seeing some children who've struggled coming back into when we've had the full return to education, where children with perhaps some social, emotional and mental health needs have been struggling, so that we'll be looking at the recommendations from that report. One of the things that we're aiming to do through that work is reduce exclusions, but rather than focusing on exclusions, we're having the focus on inclusion, because we know that if we get the inclusion right across all our schools and all our support services, then we will see a reduction in exclusions. So on the 24th of January, we've got a Wicked Issues Forum, which is again bringing everybody from across the full system together. So that will include the police, the Youth Justice Service, social care, schools, early years settings, our special needs teams, housing, benefits, for us to look at what more we can be doing to make sure we've got a really inclusive offer for all children and families, so that we're getting that early help right at the earliest opportunity. We're engaging families through our family journey from pre-birth, so that they've got those good relationships with services and they know where to go for help and support when they need that. And so that we are, as I said earlier, keeping local children in local schools. And I think that's going to be a really exciting piece of work that's going to build on much of what we've already been focused on, and the lessons we've learned through the pandemic. And as Councillor Wilkinson said, on the really good starting place we've got now with those relationships, because all our schools and academies and early years providers have worked incredibly well with council services during this period. And if anything, it's really strengthened those relationships and will help us move this work forward. I think that's an update from me for now.
Thank you very much. Any comments, members, or Adam? No? I must say I'm very interested in the alternative provision. I'd be very interested in the outcome of that. Sarah?
Thanks, Lauren. Fantastic report, really interesting. Great to see what's going on. It's really positive stuff. My comment isn't really about what's just been talked about here, which is very, very positive, as I've said. It's more a comment about when I think one of the reasons that we wanted this to come to scrutiny was to look at sort of our sort of strategic. Oh God, I hate that word. Strategic overview of what the cabinet priorities are, what the council's doing. And I think something that sort of struck me is we get a really good. I think we have a really good relationship, and we get a lot of information about what children and young people as a department are doing, as a directorate are doing, and that's fantastic. I'm also interested, though, to look at the implications of the other sort of cabinet and service priorities from the other directorates and how they affect children and young people. And this isn't, I'm not asking or hoping that Julie and Leslie that you do more work and Rob and all people within the Children and Young People's Directorate, I suppose, Children's Services Directorate. I'm interested in maybe the other directorates and the other scrutiny panels feeding back. And now am I right in have I got this? Does this still happen, or did it used to happen that every report used to have a section which said how it impacts children and young people. Have I made that up? Is that something that maybe that's not from, maybe it's not a Calderdale thing, maybe I've seen that in elsewhere, but and that was sort of like put, and I guess what that showed, it might have been from another authority, it might have been one of the outside panels that I sit on, outside bodies that I sit on. But it was an interesting thing, because it's like on every single decision, how does that impact children and young people? Every sort of like area, it's putting children right at the heart of all the decisions and all of the reports and everything that happens everywhere. Now, obviously, I want that because, you know, I'm part of this scrutiny board and have a really strong sort of interest in this directorate. But I suppose that's what I'd like to see, is for the other scrutiny boards, the other directorates to bring to us and let us know. It doesn't have to be a massively sort of big thing, but just sort of the headlines again of how all the decisions that they're making, how the cabinet and service priorities that they're doing, what impact that has on children and young people in Calderdale.
Is that for you, Adam?
I think it's a really interesting point that you make, Sarah, actually, and there's a few things sort of that I started to think about as you were sort of talking about it. But so, for example, strategy and regen, for example, all the work they're doing around, you know, revitalizing town centres, etc. You know, what thinking goes into their decisions around what a place looks like in terms of young people and the services that they use, and whether or not there's things that are available to them in terms of you know, youth activities and health services and schools and all the rest of it. So I think, yeah, I mean,
what the street scene looks like from a 3-year-old's point of view, you know, from the visual height of a sort of like a 1 foot person or a 2 foot person rather than a 5 or 6 foot person.
Yeah, and I'm not actually sure how much work goes on across directorates. So would Julie be consulted, for example, in those sorts of decisions, or anyone else in CYP for that matter? So I think it's a really valid point that you make. It's just obviously not wanting to give officers from other directorates too much more work at the same time. But yeah.
Helen, Councillor River.
Thank you, Chair. I also think it's a really interesting point that Sarah's made. I'm wondering if this might date back to Every Child Matters, that we had reports with Every Child Matters implications. But again, I might be thinking of another organisation. But I think in terms of, no, I know about giving people extra work, but somehow shifting the perspective to look at the environment through a child's eyes and all the other things we do. I don't think it's just about extra work. I do think it's about shifting the perspective. The main thing, though, I actually indicated, great, it's a lot of really good report, great information. I think what concerns me is things like education recovery. It's not going to go away. You know, obviously it's going to be a long-term, some of the implications are going to be sort of very long-term, but I think it is something I would like, as perhaps could we sort of keep in touch with, maybe, I don't know, 6 monthly, twice, something like that, because once these things go out of the headlines, they've not gone away. And I think it's really important, you know, we do keep up and on that.
Absolutely agree. Julie, care to comment?
Thanks very much, Councillor Rostrick. I was just typing something in the chat. We had a meeting yesterday with Kate McNicholas, who's the new Assistant Director in Regen. And it was a really interesting meeting. Leslie was with me and Rob as well, just looking at the crossover areas. One was around economy and looking at children who are not in education, employment and training, and what they were doing around the skills agenda, kickstart, apprenticeships, etc., making sure that's really tied up, particularly with the work going on at West Yorkshire level. We also talked about housing. We talked about care leavers who may become homeless, and what we were doing at Ryburn House, what we were doing with some social housing providers, maybe to look at developing children's homes. So we had a really good cross-cutting conversation around loads of areas with Regen. So I think it's a really good idea what's being suggested about talking to other departments and not calling them to account, but just talking about those crossover agendas. We do it at officer level. I think it'd be really good to join at the scrutiny level on it as well. You know, you see Sarah Richardson regularly around the complaints work that comes in and the learning from that, you know, that's dealt with in that department. She's been heavily involved in, you know, obviously, you know, the kind of Never Hungry Again campaign, etc. So there is a lot of crossover work, particularly with public health, and you do have Ben here regularly as well, giving you updates on that work. So it is kind of interwoven in there, but it's something that could be strengthened if you wanted to.
Is this, sorry, Chair, could I come in as well?
Yeah,
again?
sure. Yeah.
I mean, there's also a lot of crossover with the climate emergency stuff and the work that Scott Patient's doing. So, you know, like stuff to do with school streets, for example. There's been work around sort of the sort of school meals that are being provided in schools and whether we can move towards more plant-based alternatives to help tackle the climate emergency. We've distributed resources to schools around climate change during COP26. We even had one of our youth council young people attending COP26 and speaking there. So there's a lot of cross-cutting work between those two areas as well. I don't know whether it's worth exploring in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I think we probably should. I think Sarah and I might take that and run with it a little bit and see where we can come up with.
Maybe what we could do is talk to, maybe like if we have a meeting of the chairs meeting, we could bring it up there. Chairs and deputy chairs. Scrutiny. Might be a way forward.
All right, Adam, Julie, thank you very much for that. We're nearly at the end, members. You can taste your tea, I'm sure. Okay. So thank you, Adam. Thank you, Julie. Item 10, work programme. 10A, you're going to let me, Sarah and Lauren and Sophie sort that out. And 10B is the terms of reference for the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Board. Sarah, would you care to comment? You're going to chair this. Well, I think we just have to agree the terms of reference.
I've just realised I'm muted. Sorry about that. Yeah. So can I propose the that we basically that we go with this? It's I had a meeting with somebody from Leeds the other day. There's some very interesting stuff. I just think it's yeah. So I mean, it's all there. If you haven't read it already, do read it. So I think it's going to be a very interesting piece of work.
What timescales do you envisage, Sarah?
That's a good question. I think because of Christmas coming up, that's I mean, it'd be great if we could have a meeting of this group before Christmas, but my diary is ridiculous already. So
in the terms of reference, there's a scrutiny a day meeting to be held in January, focus session in February, and report presented to scrutiny in March, 16th of March. Are you happy with those timescales?
I am. I think that we can meet those.
Okay. Lauren, do we need to vote or just agree them? Or...
No, that's absolutely fine. As long as members are in agreement, then we can sort of formally approve those and get the planning in place for the work to go ahead. Thank you.
All right. That'll give you something to think about while you're eating your turkey, Lauren. If indeed you eat turkey or you're a vegetarian equivalent. Or pot roast, yes, or whatever they all are. All right, thank you, members. I know it's dragged on a bit tonight, but again, I think the early help will be so exciting. Really shows a real bit of progress. That
it was a very interesting meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Well, and yeah, as I said, 2 or 3 really good items. The pupil place one, although, as I made a comment at the time, I'm amazed that Brexit got mentioned. We were short of French wine because of that, not because of school places. But anyway, thank you all for your time, members. We won't be meeting again before Christmas, so I wish you a happy holiday season, whichever way you